What is up, my lusty programming stallions? It's Zach here, back with the third installment of our online multiplayer tutorial. And today what we're going to do is look into creating a username system in the game. So when you join the game, you'll be prompted to type in your username, and that will be displayed to all the other users in game. We're also going to look at motion interpolation. So let's go ahead and begin. So the first thing we want to do when doing a username system is we want to start writing data and have them enter their username exactly when they join into the lobby. So we're always going to start on the server side. Whenever we start messing around with new features, we're always going to start on the server side, just because it's easiest, I believe, to read. Alright, so what we're going to need to do, you see we have this message move here. We're going to make another case message, and this is going to be message join, we'll say. So in my configurations here, I'm going to insert one, and I'm going to say message join. I'm going to name that value of 2. And basically what this is going to do is every time a new client will join the game, it'll call this message. Alright, so if you look at what we really need for a username, well, we're going to need a username. So I'm going to say username equals buffer read with our buffer, and this is going to be buffer string. Now I told you about like the buffer unsigned date, unsigned 16, all that. Well, there is buffer bool, which is a true and false value, which is 1 or 0. A string, which is a string of any size, and a text, a string of any size without the final null terminating character. So those are different. So with the string, we can actually just send text data, which is very, very handy. All right. Now we want to access, now this is kind of confusing because on the server side, you're not really understanding what we're sending from the client side. What we're sending from the client side is what our username is going to be, right? And who sent the username and all of that stuff. So to make this a little bit easier to understand, since we want to use the object that we're trying to change the name to, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say client object equals client map string socket ID, and then our client ID current is just going to be client object.client ID. So now we can use this client object sort of dot operator to access anything, right? So what we want to do with this username is once we read it from the server, in our other client, in our O server client, we'll probably do it in both. I want to set a variable name to equal nothing, just so it has that variable there. We'll put it in both the other client as well. Name equals that. And then here, I want to say client object dot name equals username. So right here what we're doing is we're reading the username from where it was sent, and then we are setting the client object's name to that username. So now what we have to do is send it out to all the other clients that, hey, well, this user has joined. It's now set its name. Now let's write it out. So here I'm going to say buffer seek, our send buffer. Remember to get that back to the beginning of our buffer. And I'm going to say buffer write with our send buffer, buffer U8, and we're going to set our message join. And then we're going to write out who sent the actual message, which we're going to say client ID current, because remember we still have this client ID current, which just gets the client object ID, which is what we want. And then we're going to write out the actual name of it. So username. All right, pretty simple. So we are reading what our username is. We're setting the client object to that, and then we are just sending it out to everybody else. So now what we need to do is we are going to say with oServerClient to actually send this data. Here, and I'm just going to comment, we are sending the newly joining name to all other clients. Alright, so here I'm going to say, we don't want to send it to ourselves, so I'm going to say if client ID does not equal client ID current, then we're going to say network send raw self.socketID other.send buffer and buffer tell other.send buffer. Now this is where like a buffer tell comes in handy, because when they enter the username, they can enter pretty much however long of a username they want. So we don't actually know how much data we're sending here. So this buffer tell function comes in handy. So now that we're sending the newly joining name to all the other clients, what we need to do is we also need to send the newly joined client the name of all other clients. So with oServerClient, and we want to do this after we've already sent our name to all the other clients. So I'm going to comment here again, send the newly joined client the name of all other clients. So if client ID does not equal client ID current, because we still want to send it to ourselves, then we're going to pretty much just take this, put it down here, and since we're using our with oServerClient, we don't have a current, we just use client ID. And here we're going to say name, because we want to just send that name to everybody. And then we're going to send it. So network send raw. And here we're going to just say socket ID. Do not put self, because we don't want to use this socket ID. We want to use the server client socket ID. Buffer tell other.send buffer. We do want to use this send buffer though, because the server client doesn't have a send buffer. Alright, so basically what we're doing here is we're reading in the username, we're giving that client object the username, and then we're writing out this to the clients, really what's going on here, and then we're sending that actual data to newly joining name to all other clients, and then after that we are sending the newly joined client the name of all other clients. So the reason why we split this up into with and then with, and we don't just do it all in the same turn, like you might think it would make sense to just maybe do that, right? But the thing with GameMaker is that nothing is running all at the same time. So this server client is running through the first server client on there, second, third, all the way until however many clients you have on there, and we don't want to start sending this data until we've sent all of the server clients this data. Alright, so once we've sent all of them this, then we're going to send them all another packet. Alright, so now let's make the client side. I hope that all made sense to you. So in our client scripts and our handle message, we're just going to create the case. So case message join. And here we're going to say client equals buffer read buffer u16 because we sent that initial ID, and then we're going to say our username equals buffer read buffer string, and then here we're going to actually get the client object. Now I'm thinking I want to change this because if we use what we're using here, which is getting the client ID and always having to do, client object equals the client map and client, our script is going to get pretty long because we're going to have a lot of different messages being sent out, whether shooting, whether throwing grenades, throwing health packs, doing all sorts of stuff, chat system. If we keep on using this system, it is going to get very, very long. So what I want to do is simplify this on how we actually get our object that we need. So I'm going to create a new script called client get object, and it's going to take in the parameters of a client ID, argument 0. And then in our handle message, we can pretty much take this. Yeah, we'll just take all of it. And pop it down here in our client get object script. And here, let's get rid of this. We don't need that. We can just return this. Else, return L. And that's basically it. So we've just pretty much just copy and pasted the code and put it into a new script. So that's going to be really easy to do. So now in our client handle message, all we have to say is client object equals client get object client, and then we can say client object.x equals xx and client object.y equals yy. So we can just use this. So we can do the same thing down here as well. I'm going to say client object equals client get object client, and here I can say client object dot name equals username. And that's all we need. So, yeah. What we're doing here is just reading from the server on our message join. We're not actually sending anything yet, because when we send things, we are going to do it when we initially connect and we put in our username. Alright, so if we look back on it now, what we're doing is in our message join, we're reading our username, which we were going to send. We're setting that client object to the username. Then we're writing out our message join, our client ID, and our username, which we just read from right here. So we're, our message ID, which is our join, our client ID, and then our username, which we just got. And then we are just sending that off to all the other clients. Alright, so you might be asking yourself, how does this message join actually get started? How does it get sent the data to even run this code message join? And so what we're going to do is in our client connect, we're going to say buffer seek send buffer seek start, and in here we're just going to send the messages just like we normally would. So buffer write send buffer u8, and we're going to send our message join, and then we're going to write out our username that we picked, which we're going to create a parameter for it. So here, let me up here, let me create that parameter name, and we'll say name equals argument 2. and then we're just going to send the data. Network send raw, socket send buffer, buffer tell, send buffer. So right when we connect, we're just sending out our message join, our name, and our just actually sending that data. So then this should make more sense to you now, sort of what we're doing in our server, which we initially got the message ID, which we read right here every time in our message join. Then we read the username that we just sent, and we send it all accordingly, and then write it off to everybody else, and then send that data. This right here, we're just writing it in the buffer. We're not actually, when we say buffer write, pretend it's just like a file that we're just writing onto this file. Nothing's being sent yet. The network send raw is how it gets sent. This is just writing out what's going to be on our file that we're sending. All right. So there we go. So now we actually let's do the code to put in the username. So let's go to our O client, because that's what we'll use. Sort of what I'm doing here with the server client, the client is the player and no other client. That's all client side, but you can pretend that the O client is pretty much the player, but I just want to keep everything that's sort of local and non-multiplayer in the player object, and everything that has to do with multiplayer, connecting, sending messages, etc. in the client object. So you can mix the both if you want, that's fine, but that's just how I do it, just for organization purposes. So let's just create a group real quick and call it server, and I'm just gonna put all my server stuff in there, and then we'll create a client, which is the player, and then we have the button, which we'll just do util. All right. So in our client here, we can see we have client connect, which we're going to need to put in the username. So right now, I think what we're going to do is let's just get rid of that, and let's just create variable connected equals false. And then what we're going to do is we have the networking event, but we're going to go asynchronous dialog, because we're going to use the async string, get async string function to actually enter in our username instead of get string. And the reason for that is because get string actually stops the execution of the game, and that should really only be used for debugging purposes. Async, get string async does not. So that's why we're going to use that. So we can call it through the dialog, because that's just what it calls. So in our dialog, we can say if not connected, connected equals true, and then we're going to connect 127.0.0.1 9000, and then our name is going to say async load result, and alarm 0 equals update speed. So if this is confusing, you never really used async, then there we go, dialog events right here. Where did that go? Oh, there it is. So here you can kind of look into the syntax of it. It's part of a DS map, you know, the async. Let's look at the networking. Probably be better. So just like how you have network type connect, disconnect, etc. You know, you just have these different sort of types, and the type of our async get string is the result type. So let me just go ahead and do it. Maybe it'll make more sense. So in our create event, we are going to say get string async, like I've been talking about. Please enter a user name. And this right here will pop up a screen, and once you hit OK and enter, this automatically calls the dialog event for async. And of course, connected equals false. So we're going to connect then using that, what we just put in, and alarm 0, and everything is normal. So then what we want to do is in our other client, we don't actually want to see our username, because how would we differentiate? I don't know, it'd be kind of confusing. So I'm going to say draw self, draw set color, C white, and then draw text, X, Y minus, what do you say, 24, name. Right? Let's go ahead and compile the game now. And we'll see if it works. So online tutorial 2, we'll say, for the build. Online builds, and let's run it. So we'll create the server. We'll join the server, and here it says please enter a username. So I'll say Zach, hit OK, and we get an error. Right. So the reason we got an error is because when we wrote in the OServer client, we didn't say other.sendBuffer, because the OServer client doesn't actually have a send buffer. So my apologies with that. You got to say other.sendBuffer to actually get the server, since we are using the with. Alright, so just looking back on it and making sure everything was correct, there's a couple things wrong with this code. Of course, I need to set other right here. And the reason we're actually getting the error is because this variable, when we create variables, it's really just stingy on it. We actually need to put a comma here instead of a semicolon, just so it knows that more variables are being created. So since we put that semicolon in, it couldn't find the client ID current because it wasn't actually a variable. It thought that all the variables were finished. Now the big mistake that we made was transferring over this client get object script, and I forgot to actually use this client ID. So in here I'm going to say client ID, and client ID, and then here we don't have actually XX and YY, so I'm just going to make it 0, 0, and we can take out client object equals. I should have taken a little bit more time in there, but I hope that makes sense. We're just doing the same exact thing that we were before with the client, but we're just passing in the parameter of client ID into these values. Alright, other than that, everything looks to be alright. Make sure, when we have a variable, that you have this comma here and that you are creating it accordingly. And let's just check one other thing. We've got our other.sendBuffers here, and everything looks to be good. So let's go ahead and compile it now. So we'll create a fourth build. And online builds. So we'll create the server. We'll join the server, we'll say Zach. Alright, so we can move around. We're not getting any errors, that's good. It's always good. And we'll just say Bob. And it looks like it works. So we go on here and we start moving around. As you can see, Bob, it shows Bob, and then we go over here and it shows Zach right here. So now we have a username system for the game. And obviously you can adjust the text accordingly to however you'd like. But yeah, this looks pretty cool. Awesome. And then we can even add another player in there. Let's try. And we'll name it RTGML, because that's the best name ever created. And yeah, it looks like it's working. So we can go over here. And everybody's connected, everybody's happy, and we're having a party. So the only thing that these people are not liking is that on the other screen, look how laggy that looks. So let's do some motion interpolation to actually smooth that out and make it look just incredible. So here's how we're gonna do it. I'm gonna go into Paint to show you guys. So here we have, let's say this is where our player sits at this point on, you know, a coordinate plane. And remember, it takes 3 steps every update. So in that 3 steps, the player's actually traveled to here. Now that's why we get this laggy, jittery motion, because it's only updating every 3 steps. So it's gonna go boom, 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 boom. Now it's not obviously this large of a gap, but it's a gap enough to actually notice it. So what we have to do is take our point from here and our point from here and animate it towards that point. Now this is going to cause a tiny bit of lag. Now not like lag where like, you know, it's laggy and jittery, but like lag as in, you know, on my player screen, he might already be here, but right now he is animating at this point right here to get there. So it will cause a little bit of lag, and that's why we're going to change that later on with motion extrapolation, something like that. I can never say that word. So that is actually predicting where the player is going to go next and already animating it to that point before the 3 steps is up, so that we don't have any sort of lag there. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So this is a lot simpler than you think it might be. So in our client, we're not really going to do anything on the server because we already have the messages that we want right here. So instead of sending the coordinates of the x and y directly, what we can do is say client object dot our 2x equals xx, and our client object dot 2y equals our yy. And we're going to need to create a time variable, and I'm just going to do it like that just so it's all even. And then we're going to want, because we want to animate it from our previous like where we start from where we want to go, we're also going to add in the variable client object dot prx, which is previous x, which equals client object dot x, and client object dot pry equals client object dot y. So now that we have all these values in here, we can simply just animate it. So in our other client, we'll say prx equals x, pry equals y, 2x equals x, 2y equals y, and then we'll put the time equals 0. All right. And in our step event, now that we've already sent all that data over, we can say x equals, and we'll just lerp it to previous x, to our 2x, and then here we're going to say 1 divided by our update speed multiplied by time. So the reason why is because we update every 3 steps, we want to have it still take 3 steps to get there. So that's why we use time. Copy this, paste it down, y, pry, 2y, and we can just say time plus plus. Alright. And I think that's going to be it for our motion interpolation. So let's go ahead and run the game. Well, we have to compile it first. So very simple. Let's go ahead and run it. We'll create the server. We'll join the server. We'll name it Zach. Looks like everything's working correctly. Whoops. Clicked off the screen while it was still going. It's a game maker bug. Alright. Join the server. We'll just say Bob. And as you can see, he kind of like shot down there, and you can kind of see him doing that. That's because he's animated. So as you can see now, look at that. He looks completely smooth. On the other screen, Bob does. If we go over here. But as you can see, there is that little bit of lag, like I was telling you about. In a shooting game, you don't really want that, but it's not so much that you actually notice it if you're on the other screen right now. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. Leave a like, go and subscribe. Let's go and try for 200 likes this time. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I'm having a lot of fun doing this series. Go to codeingmadesimple.com to learn more. Peace.